done right, eRUC can actually fix the regressiveness of petrol tax that we see at the moment and ensure a fairer spread of costs across road users. If we achieve all those things, eRUC won't just fund roads better, it'll build confidence that New Zealand can modernise and actually deliver the infrastructure we need for the next generation.
Well, Nick, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
You're Emily, it's great to be here.
I thought I might start off by doing a bit of a 30-second intro. So can you tell everyone your name, your title, and the organisation you are working for?
Sure. I'm the Chief Executive of Infrastructure New Zealand, which is the industry peak body representing those who plan, design, build and fund the infrastructure that keeps New Zealand moving.
So there was some really cool stuff that recently happened in New Zealand. And so in a recent speech at the Building Nations conference in New Zealand, Minister Bishop introduced what is quoted as the biggest change in how New Zealand funds its road network in 50 years. What is happening and why does it matter?
Well, it's a generational shift because for 50 years New Zealand's relied on fuel excise duty, or commonly known as petrol tax, as the way we pay for our roads. And that builds a hypothecated fund that is spent back into both building and maintaining roads. But there's been challenges in recent years as the vehicle fleet shifts by what it's powered or what powers it. The system's breaking down. Cars are getting more fuel efficient. Whether they're plug-in hybrids or EVs, they pay less petrol tax, and yet they still consume the roads. So the revenue streams are reducing. Of course, cars are still getting more plentiful on the roads, and the minister has announced a full transition to electronic road user charges, or eRUC, which means every vehicle, and we've currently got, I think, about 3.5 million of them in New Zealand, it means that every vehicle will pay based on how much and where they drive. That matters, obviously, because it is fairer, it's more transparent and sustainable. And it means that the funding mechanisms are future-proofed and that roads will still be able to be funded and that funding is more sustainable into the future. And, I think it's a signal that New Zealand is modernising, that we're going to use technology, and that it's something that's building on something that we already run, and that's road user charges for diesel-powered vehicles. Well, we're going to expand that. But we also know that the electronic element is already run through private sector providers really effectively to monitor road usage and to charge commercial and diesel vehicles that per kilometre charge through road user charges.
So this announcement also was tied in to something a little bit larger, which was the draft National Infrastructure Plan. What will it take to make sure that plan as a whole thrives?
Yeah, then the draft National Infrastructure Plan is really important for New Zealand because it's setting that long-term vision and certainty about, well, what's the infrastructure we need with some really good evidence, and then plotting out over 30 years where it is we need to build and why. Part of that is about having a proper pipeline of work that's not just costed and assessed properly, but is also funded. And we found that you can't build confidence in the public mind or in the infrastructure sector if funding models are unstable or non-existent. And so by moving to eRUC, the government's really locking in that reliable revenue stream that aligns with the infrastructure plan's ambitions. And, from an infrastructure industry perspective, for the plan to work, we need bipartisan support, so to get that pipeline and that long-term strategy locked in, it can't all evaporate when the government changes. And what we've had is, projects pausing, being rescoped or cancelled every time the government changes, we've got to build more bipartisan support across the aisle to ensure that there's clarity for the sector. And we've also seen, big projects sort of talked about by various governments. Might be a light rail project or an urban renewal and transport project. And the business casing is done, hundreds of millions of dollars are spent, and everybody thinks it's going to happen. But surprise, surprise, there's no funding in place to actually do the project. The plan's got to have bipartisan support. It's got to have public trust, and along that comes we've got to have to make eRUC work is technology and data investment. That's to ensure that eRUC can run smoothly.
So I did want to dive very specifically into eRUC because that is the part that I'm super keen to kind of learn a little bit more of, and I think everyone is because it's one of the first of its. Is it the first of its kind anywhere? I don't know if anyone else is
Um,
doing it.
I would say universally it would have to be up there, wouldn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Early adopters. There we go. So in Minister Bishop's announcement, so you mentioned that there was that plan to transition all 3.5 million vehicles in New Zealand to that fairer electronic road user charging or eRUC system, which is essentially abolishing petrol tax. In simple terms, are you able to just talk through what is eRUC or electronic road user charging, and then how might it differ from the current user pays petrol tax model?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think what we know is that the petrol tax is a blunt instrument. You pay every time you fill up, regardless of whether you're driving an SUV through the streets or a small little hatchback across gravel roads. It doesn't properly price the road that you're using, nor the vehicle that you're using. eRUC, on the other hand, is distance-based charging. It uses electronic technology like a GPS or odometer linked devices to measure the kilometres you drive, and it will charge you accordingly. And I think there is room in the model for how your vehicle is powered, the weight of your vehicle on the road, and of course the particular road that you're consuming. If you are on a major state highway going into a city at peak time every day, I think that most people would agree you should pay a little bit more than a backcountry road at 1 p.m. And what eRUC will do will allow that to be charged accordingly. So it will be a direct charge to the car owner. We believe it's fairer and it's flexible. You will be priced and you will have the ability to choose whether or not you want to use that vehicle on that road at that time, knowing how much you're going to be charged.
I guess the question is probably like, why now? You alluded to a little bit earlier in terms of the types of we've got, a lot more private electrification of vehicles coming in. So why now? Why is petrol tax kind of no longer this fair or accurate way to potentially fund our roads, and what trends are driving this shift?
Well, the good news is from an emissions perspective that petrol and diesel consumption is slowly dropping in favour of EVs or plug-in hybrids. Now, the electric vehicles, while they now pay the eRUC for distance travelled, or should I say kilometres used, they don't pay anything in petrol tax, but they use and consume the same roads. They're often a little bit heavier than normal cars because of the battery weight. We also know that just through efficiency gains, modern cars and even a modern petrol car will use less fuel per kilometre. So there's less tax revenue, even though the road wear and tear is the same. And then there's that equity issue. People in rural areas often pay more than their fair share under petrol tax because they travel longer distances, but not necessarily on the most expensive roads or in the most damaging vehicles. So petrol tax is a shrinking revenue base. It's a bit skewed, and that's why we think it's time to act. And of course, this isn't going to be immediate, but it is going to be something that I think over time Kiwis will be able to get their heads around. There'll be legislation; it'll be very clear and transparent what's happening, and that's going to be important because we do have to ensure that everybody understands, and to as much as possible that public opinion at least accepts this and gets used to it over time.
Does that mean you wouldn't have to get I know currently you have to put stickers in your
Yes.
car windows. Would that replace the stickers?
Yeah, I think the hope is that it would, and it might not. At the moment, you have to pay for RUC in advance.
Yeah.
What the minister signalled was that you actually might pay it in retrospect. You might get a bill, at the end of each month or the end of each fortnight, and or you could have a direct debit and it just pays it. And that I think is quite important because it just becomes something, that is just a normal cost of running a vehicle. Yeah, you're still going to have to fill up with petrol or diesel if your car is fueled that way, but you're not going to have the fuel excise on top of that.
Mm. I think you mentioned earlier, so heavy vehicles have and in a lot of places, they're kind of the first ones that were implemented under an eRUC or a RUC system for ages. Are there any lessons that we can take from a rollout in heavy vehicles and then apply that to what we're now doing with this light private vehicle fleet?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The first lesson that we should take is this works. So, eRUC has been working for years and it's, look, it could be more efficient. We want to move away from the paper base, but actually, the technology works. Systems can track mileage accurately and reliably, and that compliance improves when systems are automated. We also know that transition is going to take time. As I mentioned, you're going to need awareness and education and enforcement as people adjust. And I think, though, that for lighter vehicles, the rollout has got to be simple. It's got to be easy. Um, and there's got to be really good customer service in place. Otherwise, you're going to lose public confidence really quickly. The other thing, of course, is that you want to be able to ensure that that revenue that you get from a universal eRUC is sustainable, so our roads can be not just built but maintained adequately over time.
One thing that I'm glad you mentioned was this idea of the current system being a bit blunt or regressive or inequitable. You can kind of pick whichever word you'd want there. So, where some drivers had to pay proportionately more based on either where they lived or the fact there was no other kind of alternative transport options.
Right.
How is kind of eRUC going to ensure a little bit more system equity where certain groups of people aren't maybe unfairly impacted compared to others?
It's a good question. I mean, I think the first one is that we know that wealthier people are making the switch to EVs or hybrids, so they are escaping, fuel tax at the moment, and that low income people who often have to use cars are stuck with older models, so they're paying the full whack because their car is run by fuel. So fairness can be built into a new system by design. As I mentioned, different rates depending on vehicles type and weight. Heavier vehicles can pay more because obviously there's more wear and tear on the pavement. Um, and I think that we could potentially see concessions or rebates built in for low income households, potentially for rural communities or essential service vehicles. And people will be able to see exactly what they're paying for and where the money goes. And I think that's something that is going to be increasingly demanded as we're focused on value. Done right, eRUC can actually fix the regressiveness of petrol tax that we see at the moment and ensure a fairer spread of costs across road users. And I think there's also the potential for smarter pricing in all this, which means that if you could potentially have dynamic charging on roads where a particular road could charge less in off-peak hours, which could help reduce congestion in some of our biggest cities.
So, wrapping up, what does success look like when we eventually get this system rolled out, we've kind of ironed out some of the kinks, how do we know that it's working from like a fairness point of view, an efficiency point of view, and even like an infrastructure funding perspective as
Yeah,
well?
yeah. Well, I think workability is the big one. So, does it work? Do people find it easier than what they've got at the moment? And can they see the revenue being applied? Fairness is important because everybody contributes according to their use, and we can build in protections for vulnerable or low income groups. Success is a good rollout with that builds public confidence. So we've got that sort of sustainability. And I think that if the government works properly and engages the private sector who are already running these systems, they don't have to spend their time and effort building, technology systems. Let's leave that to the experts, procure it properly and fairly, and get it set up faster. If we achieve all those things, eRUC won't just fund roads better, it'll build confidence that New Zealand can modernise and actually deliver the infrastructure we need for the next generation.
Awesome. Well, Nick, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast to chat with me today.
Emily, it's a pleasure, and happy to chat anytime.
To learn more about any of the guests that we have on the Bite Size podcast, you can check out our show notes at compassiot.substack.com. Alternatively, if you'd like to know more about the company that runs this podcast, Compass IoT, you can visit our website, which is compassiot.com.au. Until next time.